What's going down? This is your man Don T of Don T Records Music Group. And today I want to give you my top 5 tips on EQing. EQ is the most important tool you have in your DAW. It's the most important tool you have available to you. It shapes the sound. It gets rid of problems in your mix. And it makes it sound good if you use it the right way. So you got to have a systematic approach to EQing. You can't just throw something at the wall and hope it sticks. There has to be a problem that you're trying to address. There has to be a reason for what you're doing. So I want to give you my top 5 tips to bring your mix to the next level. So without further ado, let's go. Okay, let's get right into it. I want to share with you my top 5 EQ tips. And I'm not talking about frequencies, certain frequencies to address certain instruments in your mix. I'm talking about a systematic approach to EQing. I'm talking about how we think about EQing. And one word that you'll hear throughout this tutorial, and that word is problem or problems. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So my tip number 1 is to add the EQ as the first plugin in your chain. Okay? And the reason is to add or take away frequencies prior to hitting any other processors in your chain. I'd rather subtract than add anything at first. So my example to you would be if I had a vocal that had a rumble in the low end, I would want to remove that rumble prior to it hitting the compressor. Because when it hits the compressor is going to respond to the rumble and not to the vocal itself, compressing the entire signal. And you don't want that. Okay, so you need to remove this prior to hitting any other processor in the chain. And this is my number 1 reason why you want to add EQ as the first plugin to actually address problems prior to hitting any other processors in your chain. So let's move on to my tip number 2. My tip number 2 is to stay away from the solo button. We love the solo thing sometimes. This is not the way to mix. You must, the goal here is to make everything sound good in your mix together. And most importantly, how will you know if there's a problem in your mix if you're soloing tracks? You're not going to know, because you're not going to be able to hear it unless everything is being played together. Individual tracks may sound good on their own, but in context with the rest of the mix, they may not sound good at all. Okay? Now there is one time that I would say, hey, use the solo button. Because I do it all the time. And that's when I'm cleaning up my vocals. If I'm cleaning up my vocals, I solo my vocals. Because I want to hear every detail of the vocal. And I want to clean up anything that I don't like prior to it hitting any other processor in my chain. So this is one time that I would say, yeah, solo the vocal. Because a vocal should sound good on its own anyway. So just keep that in mind. This is one time I say, okay, solo, but every other time, don't do it. All right, so let's move on to my tip number 3. My tip number 3 is use the EQ when there's a problem to be fixed. Just because I put the EQ as the first plugin in my chain doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I got to use it. I should use it when there's a problem. And like many of us, we all use high pass filters, right? I generally use a high pass filter on everything in my mix generally, and the results are often improvements. However, I'll tell you that we got to be careful. But let me just go back. Why am I using the high pass? Let me just address that real quick. I'm using it, like many of you, to clean up, to clear out anything in the low end to make room for my kick and my bass that live in that area of the spectrum. Now, that's all good and dandy, but we must be careful that we do not lose the fullness of our mix or the body of our mix because we high pass things too far. Okay? So I will tell you, don't begin your mix using high pass because somebody did this, or the root signal of that instrument is way up here around 200, so I'm a high pass all the way up to 200. No, don't do that. Don't do that at the beginning of your mix because there's still information below 200 in that signal. So you want to kind of wait and listen and use your ears and identify the problems as things are being played together. Okay? So, yes, use the high pass, but use it when there's a problem. Use it when you have to. EQ when you have to. When there's a problem to be fixed. All right, so let's move on to my tip number 4. And my tip number 4 is don't cut out problem frequencies that only appear once or twice in your mix. I know you're saying, what? Yeah, sometimes, if it only appears once or twice, you don't want to cut it out completely. Don't throw a static EQ on it. There's another way to do this. And that's what I'm talking about, how we think about things, okay? For example, let me just give you an example, a real quick example. Again, and I'll go back to a vocal. Sometimes as rappers, we'll get, excited in the booth. We'll get close on the mic. We'll get some explosive stuff coming out that carries over into our signal. And we want to remove that. But it's not throughout the entire take. So how do I go about doing that? Let me tell you. By using a dynamic or multi-band compressor. This is the time you want to pull those tools out. We don't want to completely remove that signal completely because it only appears once or twice. And if you do that, you could cause problems for the rest of that take, like thinning out your vocal because you pull that frequency out completely, and it was just that one time that it happened throughout that take. So you got to be careful on how you remove frequencies or remove problems. So use the right tools to do that. All right, we almost home. Bear with me. So here's my tip number 5. My tip number 5 is don't try to fix issues on your mix bus, EQ. I don't add a EQ on my mix bus. I used to, but I don't need them anymore because I rather fix things in my mix instead of fixing them on my mix bus. So think about it. If my mix sounds muddy, okay, and I reduced or boost the frequency on the mix bus, I just affected the entire mix trying to fix that problem when the problem is coming from a single track or maybe 2 tracks. So why not go back to those 2 tracks or that 1 track and fix the problem there instead of trying to address it on the mix bus where I'm going to affect everything in my mix instead of fixing the problem on that individual track. So be careful of how you use the EQ on your mix bus. If you're using it just to enhance things, because you don't hear a problem, but you want to just enhance things just a little bit, then okay. But be careful. Don't try to fix issues. If there's an issue, that's key. Problem, issue, that's a problem. Don't use your mix bus to fix those problems. Go to the individual track or fix those problems on the individual track, and you'll have a much better mix at the end of the day. All right, well, there you have it. My top 5 EQ tips on EQing like a professional mix engineer. All right, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'll be bringing more tutorials to you in the future. If there's anything that you would like to see me do or talk about or discuss, whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and I'll get back to you. This is Don T Records Music Group. Thank you for tuning in. Peace.